I thought leaving my husband would teach him a lesson, but what I found when I came back completely stunned me. You won't believe how this story unfolds. And if you love gripping tales of betrayal, revenge, and redemption, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share new shocking stories like this every week. I thought leaving would teach him a lesson, make him realize what he was losing, force him to see me the way he used to. Instead, what I found when I came back taught me something far more devastating about myself. The suitcase sat by the door for 3 days before I finally picked it up. Not because I was uncertain, but because some part of me wanted him to notice, to ask me not to go, to fight for what we had. He never even looked at it. He walked past it every morning on his way to work, stepped around it when he came home, treated it like it was just another piece of furniture that had always been there. That silence told me everything I thought I needed to know. We'd been married for 7 years, and somewhere in those years I'd become background noise in my own home. He wasn't cruel or angry. He was absent. Physically present but emotionally unreachable, lost in his work, his phone, his routines that didn't include me. I'd tried everything. Romantic dinners he barely tasted, conversations he nodded through without hearing, wearing things I thought he'd notice. Nothing penetrated the wall he'd built around himself. So I decided to leave, not forever, just long enough to make him miss me, to remind him I was a choice he needed to make every day, not a given he could take for granted. I told him I was going to stay with my sister for 2 weeks. He looked up from his laptop just long enough to say, "Okay, drive safe." No questions about why, no concern about what this meant, just acceptance, as if I'd announced I was going to the grocery store. I wanted to scream, to demand a reaction, to shake him until he saw me standing there desperate for anything resembling emotion from him. Instead, I picked up my suitcase and walked out, convinced that absence would accomplish what presence couldn't. The first few days at my sister's house felt like relief. No more trying to spark conversation with someone who'd forgotten how to listen. No more hoping he'd reach for my hand during a movie or ask about my day with genuine interest. I told myself this space was good for both of us, that he'd realize how empty the house felt without me, that he'd call begging me to come home. My phone stayed silent. Not a single text checking if I'd arrived safely. No calls asking when I'd be back, nothing. The silence I'd hoped would teach him to miss me was teaching me something else entirely, about how little space I occupied in his thoughts. My sister watched me check my phone obsessively and finally said what I wasn't ready to hear. "Maybe he's not ignoring you. Maybe he's just relieved you're gone." The words hit like ice water, shocking and clarifying at once. I dismissed them immediately, defending him, defending us, insisting she didn't understand the complexity of long-term marriage. But the seed was planted, growing in the dark soil of my doubts and his continued silence. By the end of the first week, I'd convinced myself that his silence was strategic. He was respecting my space, giving me the time I'd asked for, waiting patiently for me to return. I crafted elaborate stories about how he was using this time to plan something special, to recognize his mistakes, to prepare for my homecoming with promises of change. I needed those stories because the alternative, that he simply didn't care enough to reach out, was unbearable. When the 2 weeks ended, I drove home with my heart pounding, rehearsing what I'd say when he opened the door. I imagined relief on his face, maybe even tears, an embrace that communicated everything his silence hadn't. I'd accept his apology gracefully, and we'd start fresh with renewed commitment to actually seeing each other. The fantasy was so vivid, I could almost feel his arms around me as I turned onto our street. The house looked exactly as I'd left it, but something felt different. His car was in the driveway, parked at an odd angle as if he'd been in a hurry. I used my key quietly, not wanting to announce my arrival dramatically, hoping to see him in an unguarded moment that might reveal what he'd been feeling during my absence. The living room was empty, cleaner than I'd expected. No dishes in the sink, no clutter on the coffee table. For a moment, a foolish moment, I thought maybe he'd cleaned for my return. Then I heard laughter from upstairs. Her laughter, bright and unguarded in a way I hadn't laughed in years. My feet moved without conscious thought, climbing stairs that had never felt so steep. The bedroom door was open just enough. I should have looked away, turned around, processed this information anywhere but here. Instead, I pushed it wider. She was younger, not dramatically so, but enough that I noticed the difference immediately. Sitting on the edge of our bed in one of his shirts, her legs bare, hair messy, looking comfortable in my space in a way that suggested this wasn't her first time here. He stood by the window in sweatpants and nothing else, coffee cup in hand, smiling at something she'd said. The intimacy between them wasn't just physical. It was in the way they occupied the space together, easy and natural, like they'd been doing this for a while. My presence in the doorway took several seconds to register. When he finally turned and saw me, I expected shock or guilt or panic. What I got was something far worse. Mild surprise, like I'd arrived home from work earlier than expected, followed immediately by resignation. Not the resignation of someone caught, but of someone who'd been waiting for this moment with grim acceptance. "You're back early," he said, and the casual tone shattered something fundamental inside me. The woman, credit to her composure or perhaps ignorance of who I was, simply looked between us, trying to read a situation she'd clearly not anticipated. "I should go," she said, standing and reaching for jeans draped over my reading chair. "No," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Don't leave on my account. I'm the one who doesn't belong here." The irony wasn't lost on me, how 2 weeks ago I'd felt invisible in this house, and now I literally didn't fit into the space I'd abandoned. He set down his coffee cup with careful deliberation. "We should talk," he said, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. Now he wanted to talk. Not during the 7 years of growing silence, not during my 2-week absence, but now, with evidence of his betrayal still pulling on her jeans in our bedroom. "How long?" I asked, needing to know how deeply I'd been fooled. "Does it matter?" His question wasn't defensive. It was genuine, as if the timeline of his affair was irrelevant compared to the larger truth we both needed to face. "Yes," I said, my voice cracking on that single syllable. "It matters to me." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. 3 months since April. 3 months. I tried to map those months against my memory, searching for signs I'd missed. April was when I'd suggested couples counseling, and he'd said he was too busy with the work project. May was our anniversary, the one where he'd bought me flowers from the grocery store, and we'd eaten takeout in front of the TV. June was when I'd finally decided to take this trip, to teach him what he was losing. The whole time, I'd been planning my strategic absence. He'd already found someone else to fill the space I thought was irreplaceable. The woman, dressed now, moved toward the door. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, and I couldn't tell if she was apologizing to me or to him or to the situation. I stepped aside to let her pass, unable to summon the anger I thought I should feel toward her. She was just a symptom, not the disease. When we were alone, the silence between us felt different than it had before I left. This wasn't the silence of neglect or taking each other for granted. This was the silence of a relationship already dead, just waiting for someone to acknowledge it. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked. "Why let me leave thinking I was teaching you some kind of lesson?" He looked at me with something approaching pity. "Because you needed to believe you had that power, that you could leave, and I'd realize what I lost and beg you to come back. I didn't have the heart to tell you that I'd already let go months ago." His honesty was more painful than any lie could have been. "So this whole time, while I was gone, you were just waiting for me to come back and find out?" "No," he said. "I wasn't expecting you back for another week. I thought I'd have time to figure out how to tell you, to maybe move some of my stuff out first so it wasn't so brutal. But here we are." Here we were, standing in our bedroom that wasn't really ours anymore, discussing the end of our marriage with the same casual tone we'd once used to discuss dinner plans. I thought about all the things I should say, accusations and demands and expressions of betrayal. But the truth was, I'd felt betrayed long before I walked in on him with someone else. I'd felt unseen, unheard, unloved. Finding him with her just gave concrete form to something I'd known in my bones for a while. "I thought you'd fight for us," I whispered. "I thought you'd see that there was no us left to fight for," he replied. "We've been strangers living in the same house for years. You know that. This trip of yours, it wasn't about giving me space to miss you. It was about running away from admitting what we both already knew." His words stripped away the narrative I'd built, the story where I was the protagonist teaching a lesson, taking control, making things happen. In reality, I'd been fleeing a truth I wasn't ready to face, and he'd been moving on without me. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss our emotional life stories. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed where I'd found them minutes ago, and felt the full weight of my miscalculation. I'd left to make him realize he needed me, but all I'd done was make it easier for him to let me go. I'd handed him freedom and expected him to reject it, never considering that he might accept it gratefully. "What happens now?" I asked, not sure I wanted the answer. "I think you know," he said gently. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but we both know this marriage ended a long time ago. Today just made it official." I wanted to argue, to insist we could fix this, to demand couples counseling or a second chance or literally anything that would undo what I'd discovered. But the truth was exhausting and undeniable. He was right. We'd been over for a long time. I'd just been too stubborn or too scared to admit it. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," I said, standing up. "Tomorrow I'll start looking for a place." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "I really am. This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "How did you want me to find out?" I asked, genuine curiosity cutting through my pain. "I don't know. Maybe over coffee, calm and mature, two people who'd grown apart acknowledging reality. Not like this, walking in on evidence of how thoroughly I'd moved on." The irony killed me. He'd imagined having a mature conversation about our failed marriage while actively betraying it. But then again, had I been any better? I'd imagined teaching him a lesson while avoiding the real work of communication and connection. We were both architects of this disaster, just in different ways. That night, lying in the guest room staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, I replayed everything. Not just today, but years. All the small moments when I'd chosen pride over honesty, when I'd expected him to read my mind instead of speaking my needs, when I'd withdrawn instead of reaching out. I'd been so focused on what he wasn't giving me that I'd never examined what I wasn't giving him. Intimacy requires two people showing up, and somewhere along the way, we'd both stopped showing up. I thought about the woman I'd found in my bedroom, how easy she'd looked in that space, how naturally they'd seemed to fit together. Was she better than me, or was she just new? Did she listen to him in ways I'd stopped listening? Did he share parts of himself with her that he'd stopped sharing with me? The questions spiraled, each one more painful than the last, but underneath them all was a deeper, more terrifying question. Had I ever really known him? Or had I just known the version of him I needed him to be? In the weeks that followed, we moved through separation with the same emotional distance we'd perfected during our marriage. He slept at a friend's apartment most nights. I searched for places to live, calculated the division of assets, consulted lawyers who spoke in terms that made a life together sound like a business transaction being dissolved. Friends asked what happened, and I gave them versions of the truth that made me sound less foolish. "We grew apart," I'd say, or it wasn't working anymore, never admitting that I'd left to teach him a lesson and returned to find I was the one who'd been schooled. My sister, to her credit, never said I told you so. She just held me while I cried and reminded me that mistakes don't define us, how we recover from them does. But recovery felt impossible when every memory was now tainted. Our wedding day, what had he been thinking when he said those vows? Our first apartment, had he loved me then or just the idea of me? Every happy moment now carried the weight of its eventual unraveling. Proof that I'd been building a life on a foundation that was never as solid as I believed. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, though that cut deep. The hardest part was recognizing my own role in our destruction. I thought leaving would make him see me, but the truth was, I'd been invisible long before I walked out the door. I'd made myself invisible by not speaking up, by expecting him to intuit my needs, by choosing passive-aggressive silence over difficult conversations. I'd let our marriage die of neglect while blaming him for not reviving it, never acknowledging that revival requires effort from both sides. One afternoon, packing up my things from the house, I found old photos from our early years. His arm around me, both of us smiling at something off camera, looking at each other like we'd found something rare and worth protecting. What happened to those people? When did we stop protecting what we had? I couldn't pinpoint a single moment when everything changed. It was 1,000 small moments of choosing ease over effort, silence over honesty, distance over vulnerability. Death by 1,000 tiny abandonments, each one seeming inconsequential until the accumulated weight became unbearable. He came by one evening to pick up some mail, and we ended up sitting on the porch together, neither quite ready to go inside and face the hollow shell of what used to be our home. "Do you think we ever had a chance?" I asked, not sure what answer I wanted. He considered the question carefully. "I think we had a lot of chances. We just didn't take them. Every time things got hard, we shut down instead of opening up. Every time we needed to fight for each other, we fought with each other instead. Maybe if one of us had been brave enough to really be vulnerable, to risk looking weak or needy or desperate, maybe things would be different." "I was vulnerable," I protested weakly. "No," he said gently. "You were hurt and angry and withdrawn. That's not the same as vulnerable. Vulnerable would have been saying, 'I'm terrified we're losing each other and I don't know how to fix it.' Instead, you left to teach me a lesson, and I started sleeping with someone else to feel something again. We were both cowards in our own ways." His assessment stung because it was accurate. I'd been performing vulnerability, wearing my wounds like armor, using my pain as a weapon to punish him for not healing it. Real vulnerability would have required admitting I didn't have all the answers, that I was lost and scared and desperate for connection I didn't know how to ask for. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling insufficient but necessary. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be honest with you." "I'm sorry too," he replied. "For all of it, for checking out of our marriage while still living in it, for betraying you instead of talking to you, for letting it get so bad that leaving seemed like your only option." We sat in that shared apology, two people who'd loved each other once and destroyed it slowly through 1,000 small choices. There was something almost peaceful in that moment, a recognition that we were both flawed and both accountable, that there were no villains in this story, just two people who'd forgotten how to be partners. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday, unremarkable weather, routine proceedings. I signed my name on documents that unmade 7 years of promises and walked out of the courthouse feeling oddly empty. Not relieved or devastated, just hollow, like I'd been excavated and nothing rushed in to fill the space. He texted me later that day. "I hope you find someone who makes you brave enough to be vulnerable." I stared at that message for a long time, trying to decide if it was cruel or kind, eventually settling on honest. He was right. I needed to learn how to be vulnerable, how to ask for what I needed instead of punishing people for not guessing correctly. Months passed. I moved into a small apartment, built a life that was mine alone, learned to sit with silence without needing it to mean something about my worth. I dated occasionally, testing whether I'd learned anything from the wreckage of my marriage, discovering in small moments that vulnerability was a muscle I'd let atrophy. Every time I felt the impulse to withdraw or test someone or create distance to see if they'd fight to close it, I forced myself to do the opposite. To say the scared thing, the needy thing, the thing that made me feel exposed. I saw him once from a distance, at a coffee shop I used to avoid because it was his favorite. He was alone, reading something on his phone, coffee cooling beside him, looking neither happy nor sad, just existing in his own space. Part of me wanted to approach him, to tell him I'd learned the lesson, the real one, not the one I'd tried to teach him. But I didn't. Some lessons are private, meant to be carried forward rather than shared backward. I learned that leaving to teach someone a lesson only teaches you about yourself. I learned that absence doesn't make the heart grow fonder if the heart has already grown cold. I learned that you can't force someone to fight for you, and demanding that they do only reveals your own fear of not being worth fighting for. Most importantly, I learned that real love isn't about tests or lessons or proving worth. It's about showing up, being honest, being brave enough to say, I'm scared, instead of I'm leaving. The apartment I came back to that day, the one where I found him with someone else, taught me the cruelest truth of all. You can't teach someone to miss you. They either do or they don't. And if they don't, no amount of strategic absence will change that fundamental fact. I thought I'd teach him a lesson by leaving. Instead, I learned that sometimes the person who needs teaching is yourself, and sometimes the lesson is that you've already lost what you were trying so desperately to protect.